my vocation story began at a very early age, and actually began right here in this parish. I would go to weekend mass at the 5:30 mass on Saturday evenings with my family, and I was kind of a bad kid growing up. I liked to kind of roughhouse and be loud during church. So I found myself often in the cry room with my now best friend Mason, and we would just kind of be rough. We would play with the books, play with the envelopes, and different stuff like that. Then as I started to grow older, I started to notice more about what was happening at Mass. And I would go home and I would actually play Mass. So I would take all of Father's jokes from his homilies, kind of the message, and the basic necessities of kind of like what is Mass. And I would go home and I would grab the candles out of the china cabinet, and I would grab some Pop-Tarts and some milk, and I would grab a blanket and use it as my chasuble. Although I guess it'd be more like a Coke now that I kind of am more aware. And I'd play Mass. I would turn off the TV, and I'd force my parents and my siblings to all participate in kind of my version of what I got out of Mass. But then as I transitioned into public schooling, a lot of the priesthood kind of went out of my mind. I was focused on maybe being a sports analyst. I was watching ESPN at the time, and like every young kid, rather than being a football player because I didn't like the tackling aspect of it, I'd rather be in the booth. I wanted to be on ESPN. I wanted to have my own show as a young kid. So I'd watch ESPN for hours upon hours in the summer. And then, when my parents got home, I would start just telling them all kinds of information that I learned from watching ESPN on repeat all day. And then the priesthood was kind of out of my mind at that point. But it wasn't until I made my confirmation in the 8th grade and the graces from that started flowing, I started learning more and more about my faith, more and more about the church, and I became interested again in my faith and in the church. And I credit a lot of my discernment and a lot of my vocation to now Father Michael Schultz, who at the time was just Michael Schultz. He is also a son of this parish, and he invited me on many different discernment retreats. I'd say the first one that I went on when I was in the 8th grade was the eye-opening one. It was the one in which I saw, wow, guys can live a good, holy life and be happy. I think I can do that too. So that was always in the back of my mind as I transitioned out of the 8th grade and into high school, going on different retreats with the youth group, very active in the youth group all throughout high school. And every summer I would go back to Bishop Simon Brute College Seminary, and I'd make little retreats throughout the summer. And those little retreats over time planted the seed of seminary in my heart and also on my mind. And finally, I think it was maybe going into my senior year, and I was talking with Sister Sarah, who used to be in the vocations office. And I was telling Sister Sarah, I think God's calling me to be a priest, but it's kind of expensive. I don't really know if I could handle the expenses of it. And she kind of looked at me, and she quickly put all that to kind of rest. And she said, David, if God's calling you to be a priest, then it's going to work out. Everything's going to be all right. You don't have to worry about the finances. So I kept it on my heart as I went into my senior year of high school. And it was one time when I was before the Blessed Sacrament, and I was just kind of telling him, kind of my hesitant, why I was hesitant to go to seminary. And I just felt this peace come over me. And he wanted me to go to seminary. He was calling me to go to seminary. He was calling me to be one of his priests. And so, from that point on, I committed to it. I said, all right, Lord, if you want me to do this, then I'm going to do it. And so after that, I started I was free at that point, once Sister Sarah had kind of reassured me on the finances part of it, and I was free to make that choice. And so I started seminary in 2019, and I haven't really looked back.